Hi, Neil. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day to talk about mental performance training today. I've
No
heard
problem.
you speak already a lot on podcasts, and you're also a new Substack writer. So I've been enjoying the content you've been putting out over there
Thank you.
also. So, for the people who don't know who you are, like, could you introduce yourself a bit?
Yes, I'm Neal Palles. I am a social worker. I'm a licensed clinical social worker here in Longmont, Colorado, and I also have an additional degree in applied sports psychology. And so I also hold a certification as a mental performance consultant. It's a lot of stuff, but what I do is I provide mental health therapy to athletes, and I also do mental performance coaching. Um, Completely separate hat I wear is I'm an ultra running coach for Carmichael Training Systems for CTS. And so I work with athletes worldwide, helping them to get ready for marathons and ultra runs. So um, do that. And then I also have my private practice here in Colorado, just working with athletes on an individual basis. Sometimes I'll do talks or trainings. I have a training that I do called Mental Skills for Ultra Running that'll be starting back up in February. It's just to help people get their mindset ready for a race.
Right. And mental performance training or mental training in general is something which is like relatively new for me.
Mhm.
And that this is why also I wanted to speak to you so I can learn and hopefully other people can learn through our conversation. But the
Awesome.
question like that I wanted to ask is how did you get into mental performance training? Like what was it that drew you towards this topic?
Yeah, well, it goes back years, years and years and years ago. When I was a kid, I took this program called Outward Bound, and they have it worldwide. And what it is, we went on this long 23-day backpack course in the mountains here in North Carolina, and basically I was put into an environment that was really challenging that I'd never been in, and you're put in with a group of people you've never met, and you go on this adventure. Basically, you go
Right.
rock climbing, you go mountain, climbing, whitewater canoeing, all sorts of things that put you in this very, very challenging environment. We were up late at night backpacking, trying to find a way using a map and compass, and that adventure led me on this journey, this curious journey of like, wow, we could really gain a lot from these experiences, whether it be backpacking or mountaineering or rock climbing, to ultra running. Like, what can we gain from that experience? So my mind was already starting to churn. I went back. It was back in high school, and I
Yeah.
wrote a book. I wrote a paper called "The Psychology of Mountaineering." After that, I started looking into that. It's like, why are we doing this? Why are we climbing these big peaks? And that was always in the back of my mind. I went on, undergrad, got a degree in undergrad degree in psychology, but I also focused on working with people outside. So I guided in the mountains. I worked for Outward Bound for a long time. I taught people these skills that were transferable to life. So you have this experience, this hard, challenging experience, and I look at it and go, "What can you take at this
Mm.
and bring into your life?" And so when I use this in my practice, I'm working with a lot of people, they're ultra runners, but I'm going, well, what did you learn here? What did you
Yeah.
go? We're going back to that a lot. Um, and went to graduate school. And as I was going to graduate school, if you're familiar with the Chicago Bulls, they're
Yep.
winning all these championships. And my brain was just churning. I was like, this is incredible. Look at the mindset here. And then they started talking about mindfulness. And Phil Jackson, the coach of the Chicago Bulls, was one of the first persons to bring on somebody to teach these mental skills. He was an early adapter to this. And you hear these players talking about it. Now we have Steve Kerr, who's the coach of the Golden State Warriors. Sorry, I'm talking about basketball here in the states, but but one of the one of the winningest teams. And why is that? Well, they're using these mental
Mhm.
skills. They've adopted, whether it's mindfulness or different kinds of skills, or they even brought on a sports psychologist or a mental performance coach to work with them. And they're starting to value more and more mental health. So my process is I'm looking at this and going, this is incredible. How am I going to bring this on into my life? it takes time, but years later, I was like, I want to go into sports psychology. I didn't have the time or the money, and this opportunity arrived back in 2016 to go back to graduate school. I took the opportunity, went back, and got all these additional training in applied sports psychology, and started working with my passion right now is in ultra running. And but I still have this passion for just being in the mountains and rock climbing and mountaineering. So I
Right.
love working with these athletes. So that's how I got into it. I love, how does our mind work out here?
Yeah.
What gets us to the top of these mountains? What gets us to the finish line? How do we push ourselves through these very challenging experiences?
How close or far do you think we are to answering those questions? Like, I don't want to say definitively, but like, do you feel
Oh,
that like,
I think the answer is there. Yeah, it's, why do we do it? I think, looking at, you know, some of the research, I mean, just thinking about this excitement of the idea of mastery, of getting better at something. So if we look at someone, years ago, people like skateboarding, for example, or I mean, just let's go back to ultra running. Let's go, just stick in this topic is ultra running. Years ago, people are maybe finishing, finishing like Western states a lot slower. Okay. But they see one person start to get a little bit better and they're like, oh, wait a second, maybe I could do that. Or they're starting to use this to technique. And they're like, what they're doing is developing this mastery that, one on top of the other. Skateboarding was like that, is that, and rock climbing is like that. So they're seeing these skills and they're like, oh, wait a second. I improve on that, and you're getting better and better and better. And it's just, I think that is one of the biggest motivators is this idea of competency or mastery.
mm,
Um, we also find the other, parts of the motivation and drive for things is this autonomy and connectedness. And one of the things ultra running does is it brings this community together, and that people are really attracted to that. And that's fun. So that are these motivating pieces to this. But to get to the top of the mountain, that it goes back to mastery. It's like, oh, can I do that? Let's see.
mm,
See if I can keep pushing myself to try that. And we are talking a little earlier before we started about getting older. It's, yeah, you might not be able to run as fast as you did when you're in your early 20s, but what can you do now? It's like I'm looking
mm,
forward to, being in my 60s and 70s and looking at that and going, I'm gonna kill it over these races,
yeah,
for my
yeah,
age group. Yeah.
yeah. And you mentioned earlier that like examples of like basketball teams like the Chicago Bulls, like getting in performance or mental performance coaches and putting a very specific or like deliberate, I would say, shining the spotlight on mental performance. Where
Right.
do you think currently the ultra running community or even just the trail running community are with mental performance?
I think they're adapting it pretty quickly.
Okay.
They're interested in I think they're curious about it, they're interested in it, they see that there is a big component to it. Um, I think more and more people are gravitating towards books, podcasts, Substack articles, and going, "Wow, this is cool." Do they want to? How do they don't know exactly how to bring this in for themselves, and and so they're not necessarily, I think, going to mental performance coaches or sports psychologists or therapists yet. I think at the high level, there's some, yeah, let's check this out. Let's do this.
Right.
I know of some great athletes that have become mental performance coaches or becoming mental performance coaches. And it's like, so there's definitely this drive and interest in it. And I've just seen it change dramatically over the last, since I started this, 9 years ago, when I started getting into this field in particular.
Right. Yeah, my experience is that, like, still, of course, I'm an amateur, and all my friends are maybe everyday athletes would be a better word. A few weeks ago, a friend of mine got in touch. He was preparing for a backyard ultra, and he was like, "How should I train for it?" I thought, "Well, what's your mental performance training plan?" And he's like, "What do you mean?" I'm like,
Yeah.
"What do you mean? What do you mean? Like, how is it that, like, we all say that backyard ultra." or ultra running is mental, and backyard ultra
Yeah.
even removes a lot of that stimulus or um like excitement of trails and mountains and views, like it's the same
Yeah.
loop over and
Yeah.
over.
Yep.
So like what you already mentioned some of the elites are doing it. So like what do you see on the elite side and on the amateur side? Like what are they doing? What percentage of people are doing it? And what does it entail?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I actually looked this up the other day, and I can't really speak for it for ultra running. I think I could speak for it in general. Is the research when they've looked at like who's doing mental performance training, and it goes from 12 to 50%,
Oh
and
wow.
and so this wide range, and so it really it depends, and it probably also depends on the culture, the stigma of mental health and mental performance in your country and in your local region.
Right.
Um, and I think, it could be different in Great Britain as it is in Austria, as it is in the United States, and in different parts of the United States. And I think in different parts of ultra running, I don't know. I think it's becoming more accepted and understood because of podcasts like the Coopcast, and you hear, think about David Roche. He's talking about mental health and mental performance all the time. So people are adopting it, and I think it's they don't know how, or they're going to say, "I'm going to try this. I'm going to try self talk," and they don't know how to build that in, or that's not necessarily what they need to work on.
Yep.
It's like we think about all these little things like self-talk or imagery, or I don't want to say little things, they can be really big things. And but there's more to it than that.
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
it's
for sure.
much more to it, about learning how to regulate your emotions, and which is a big, there's a lot of research out there that's saying, hey, people who are have that ability to regulate their emotions and understand their emotions actually perform really, really well.
Right.
But that's not just self-talk. That's not just imagery. That's not just mindfulness.
So you mentioned all these interventions, and kind of you're already alluding to it's a bit more than just sometimes doing kind of a bit of imagery or mindfulness. But before we really get maybe more on the programming side or how you would structure it, how do you decide what interventions to do with people? And maybe I think something that would be interesting for people to know is, do the interventions depend on how physically strong an athlete is? Or or there are other factors which are more important?
Oh, it's all individual. It's all individual. Really, I mean, so if someone were to come to me, we're going to start out just talking about their background.
Right.
How they get into the sport? How did you get into ultra running? What was your sport life like before? What is your life like? And this is where I may differ from other mental performance coaches in that I'm coming from this whole person mindset, the whole human. I'm coming from this also mental health mindset. I want to know what their life is like outside of sport. Because a lot of times what's going on outside of sport is affecting that sport, those stressors. How do you respond to anxiety? How do you respond? Are you down a lot? Or, have you had trauma in your background? And so it's just all this individual stuff. So, there are some people who I just want to learn about self-talk. That might not help you. So I'm
Yeah.
looking at what's worked for you in the past. Have you tried that self-talk? Well, some people, yeah, I try this is doesn't work at all. Okay. Well, have you tried imagery? I can't close my eyes and imagine things. I've trying mindfulness. I don't get it. And so I'm really going back to where they are right here, right now, and who they are. What are their motives? Why do they want to do this? What are their values? Who are they? Who are they at the core? And how are they responding right now? What's worked for them in the past? What hasn't worked for them in the past? And really what I'm doing is more, I'm not just going, well, we're going to do this skill, and this skill. Let's talk about how you're approaching it and what is going on in your mind in a race. And I'll use myself as an example. If you got to say, I did a race a month ago, the Javelina 100 here. It's in the desert in Arizona. And you're talking about loops, this is 5 loops. You get to see the same cactus over and over again. And the there wasn't, yeah, I had a mantra, I had these, things, going on in my mind. And then I used some of that. What I really ended up using was just kind of this knowledge that, this process, coming back to the thing like the process of just moving forward. Here are the things that I'm doing. I'm taking this gel every half hour. I'm filling up my water bottle here and I'm moving forward. And that's all I thought about. That's all I
Right.
thought about. And I got kind of injured and I sat down for an hour and a half. I didn't think I couldn't get back up. I mean, my legs are really stiff and you're like, oh, should not have sat down. And, and I, someone started talking to me and all of a sudden there was this switch. It's like, yeah, this hurts, but I could do this anyways. and
Yeah.
and I've got 9 hours to go 20 miles and I could do that. And went back into that mode of so it was this part emotional regulation. I noticed that I was hooked on these thoughts. So this awareness of, oh yeah, this stuff is pushing me around. I'm sitting down. I'm starting to think I can't, instead of, yeah, you can do this. You can do
Right.
this. And it was a switch. It was an instantaneous switch. Some of that self-talk, but a lot of that's awareness that you are hooked on that garbage.
Yeah. Yeah.
Once you're aware and you have that and that's that mindfulness too, it's like, oh, now I have a choice to,
Right.
to go in this direction. So it's not necessarily one in particular skill.
Mhm.
It was a combination of different things that was able to help me regulate and go forward.
There is kind of maybe a kind of undertone that I didn't expect, that you kind of see mental performance starting at mental health, kind of. I don't know if I'm understanding it right, right?
Yeah.
Can you
Yeah.
tell us a bit more than that? Like
Yeah.
how?
Let's dive into it. I mean, so you're you're not separate from, your performance isn't separate from your health, right? If you have a
Mhm.
cold, you have the flu, you're going to go out for a run, you're going to notice that your
Yeah,
performance is going to suffer. If you have stuff that is stress in your life, relationships, work stress, day to day stuff that comes up, financial stress, politics, whatever that is, that's going to be a weight inside of you and it's going to be a cognitive load. And you learning to recognize that, balance that, adjust, manage those stressors is going to help you perform way better than just go, well, I'm just going to use this self-talk or imagery. Because even if you're trying that, it's kind of like, I'm just going to put on these shoes because these shoes are the best shoes to get me through this race when you haven't trained.
yeah.
So, it is dealing with your health before you try to do this. And so that's where I think mental health is at the core of mental performance, or I'd like to use a pyramid, it's at the base of it. Mental health, psychological safety, am I safe here? This idea of, go back into this idea of comparing or feeling like an imposter. You saw the thing that I wrote
Yeah.
about being an imposter a little while ago. It's this idea that if I'm feeling unsafe here because I feel like an imposter, that's going to weigh me down. That's going to affect my performance. If I'm comparing myself to that person who just ran past me, that's going to weigh me down. And so, but why am I doing that in the first place? So we're going to help you look at that. And then we're going to go, hey, how do we unhook from that and refocus onto what matters? But dealing with, again, go down to that basement level. What is my stress like? If I'm carrying all this weight, this large backpack, or you even can think about your running vest. If my vest is loaded with all the stuff that I don't need to have, I'm going to go a lot slower. Let's unload that stuff. Let's get rid of that stuff. Let's manage that stuff. Then you're going to be able to run. Just like, hey, get rid of the flu, get rid of the COVID or whatever it is,
Yeah.
you know, you're going to feel better. Let's work on these physical skills. It's, actually okay, let's go back to running. We're not just focusing on these intervals or this tempo run, or we're working on your nutrition, your daily nutrition. Are you sleeping? you know, this is the whole person.
And I was looking at some studies as while I was writing some articles, and like the amount or the percentage of runners within the ultra running space who tend to suffer from mental health issues tends to be um, like similar to the average population or sometimes slightly higher. So
Right.
we're like, and one of the risks actually that there was that ultra runners or runners, let's put it that way, might use excessive volume to like self
Right.
medicate. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
like now that we're like on this mental health side of things, like do you think ultra runners are more, I don't know, like suffer more from mental health? Like, because for me at least, like, of course, I also work in IT and I'm always like
Okay.
connected, right? So
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
on paper, I'm always on a computer and, like looking at social media and,
Yep.
YouTubes and stuff like that. But I can do like long runs without really needing my phone. And I don't feel
Good.
judged or like feel that imposter syndrome, for example, when I'm at a
Yeah.
race, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I imagine some people like feel that. So even in a what I would call a friendly space, like because you're
Yeah.
running, we're all running, people might still
Yeah.
feel that anxiety. So how
Yeah.
can people navigate this? Like,
Yeah, I mean, so to navigate it, I think one of the first things is awareness that you're experiencing it. You're catching yourself. Oh yeah, I'm looking at Strava, or I'm comparing myself at the starting line. You know that awareness, is key, because once you're starting to be aware of that, you got to go back to your why. And we don't. I kind of use that lightly. I want to go back to your purpose and your
right,
values. Why are you running? Is it to, to have an be an Instagram influencer, or is it because you love this, And I go back to, a race that I've DNF'd so many times, and people are like, oh, why, you must be really bummed out. I was like, no, I'm out here having fun.
yeah,
That is my why. I'm out here to, be in the mountains and see these incredible sights, and be with this community of really, really cool people, and just enjoying that experience. And I'm not comparing myself to you or somebody else. I'm right here, right now. So the first part is being cognizant of, hey, I'm getting hooked on this. I'm getting pushed around by this. I'm feeling bad by looking at Instagram, or reading someone's race report, and how awesome it was, and I didn't finish. All right, come back to right here, right now. Why are you running? Why are you doing this? If it's for influencers, that is an extrinsic goal,
mm,
and that may never be reached.
yeah,
It is arriving versus becoming. This idea of, hey, I'm going to be who I am. I'm going to look and drive for my purpose out here. And if it's to compete, that's great.
yeah,
Compete, but look at it as, you know, that person over there is pushing you harder. So if you're competing, I'm there to, race, and okay, that person's there to push me. Okay. All right. They're not there to beat you. They're there to push you.
right,
That is the reframe on that. Is that
right.
helpful?
Yeah, no, I mean, I mean, I think it's for me, it's definitely helpful. And of course, I've also heard you speak before, so I kind of heard these things before. What I want to maybe ask is this a process which needs someone? Does it need a professional? Can it be done alone through a lot of thought? Like,
I
how
I
could
think
people start?
I think there can be, you can do some of it on your own for sure. I think it's helpful, to get into a therapist or, or a mental performance consultant or, a sports psychologist. It differs in every state, every country, what those titles are. But, I start with that therapy because I've got that therapy hat on first. But you can develop some of that self awareness just by simply journaling
Right.
after your workouts. It's like, you do a long run. What were you thinking before the workout? What was your mind telling you? What was your mind telling you? What was your mind telling you during the workout? What was your mind telling you after the workout? How do I want to approach this differently? How do I want to treat myself differently? So I'm behaving in the way that's aligned with my values, who I am. So if I'm thinking about, okay, I'm in this run, and I'm like, oh, this person passed me, and I just get angry and frustrated, and I start running up this hill that it's way too fast for me. Is that helpful? Or hey, maybe, yeah, wait a second, maybe I'm telling myself I can't hold on to this, and really I can. Like I was telling myself in that race, is like, I think we're done. Oh, wait a second. That's not true.
Yeah.
We're not done here. We got all this time. I could walk this, you know? And so that was being aware. As soon as I was aware of it, where I was like, oh yeah, no, I got this.
Right.
you know? And but you have to start practicing by journaling,
Right.
and so I'll have athletes, either they could journal to themselves, or they could journal, and write it down. We could talk about it, but start writing it down. Don't think of it as journaling, just writing it down. It's like, what was I, what was the situation? What was my mind telling me? What did I do? Was that aligned with who I want to be, with my purpose, my values, what my core is telling me?
Right. Okay, so it seems like when an athlete approaches you, and kind of your approach is to first look at them as a person, their whys, their values, see how they work in, or like how they operate in life. Are they an anxious person? And then let's say they came to you for specifically for a performance at a race.
Mhm.
How would you and then continue to work towards that goal, right? Like, what are the stages? Like, how would you, I don't know, would you periodize it? Would you, what's the length of time?
Yeah. Well, what's the length of time? Well, the best length of time is a long ways from the race.
Yeah.
I have had a number of people come to me, and understandably, and it's okay to do this, but it's not going to help you out the week before the race.
Yeah.
You're not going to, it's like if you came and just started doing intervals, I'm going to do this set of intervals the week before the race. It ain't going to work. So it's starting out, you know, long in advance. And, sometimes I say 6 months, start out longer, as soon as you say, hey, I'm thinking of signing up for, these races, late next summer, next fall, start working on it now. Don't, start working on that. Just like you're doing your physical training, you start building your base right now, start working on your mental performance now. And yeah, you can do this in a periodized fashion. I talk about kind of how you can break it down, starting with your why. Starting with your why, starting with your purpose, motivation. What is the motive? What's motivating you to? Why did you sign up for this race? What's behind this? What is your goal here? What does that look like? We got to also unearth what those hidden goals are. Is it because you're
Yeah.
getting, you want the big belt buckle and the Strava likes, or the kudos on Instagram? That's those are all in the background for people. And sometimes they're either, maybe unconscious, or they're just not spoken. Um, so starting with motivation, but I also, and kind of interwoven in there is that psychological safety of, what are these things that are hindering you, that are, blocking you? What's going on in your life that's, maybe you're feeling a little dysregulated. So, you're feeling your nervous system amped up. Let's kind of tap into some of this right now, so it's not affecting you in the bulk of your training. So that's periodization right there. We're starting at the
Yeah.
base. And then we could weave in these different skills. I like to, kind of go into mindfulness, after that. It's like, and because, when we think about what mindfulness is, it is being aware in the present moment, non judgmentally. And so that's not just awareness of like where I am right here, right now, because some people don't like where they are right here, right now, but it is being aware of what my thoughts are, what my mind is telling me. So we have thoughts, and we could be aware of those thoughts too, so we can get this distance from them. So this is where that mindfulness could, and it could be simple as just grounding in the present, taking anchoring in the present moment. I talk about this a lot, of just becoming aware, notice what you're thinking, notice what your mind is telling you, come back into your body, feel your hands, your feet, your body sitting in the chair, your body standing on the trail, feel your feet on the ground, and then look around. Where are you? What do you see? What do you smell? What do you notice right here, right now? It could be taking that deep breath. You could do that in a split second. Oh, yeah. I see the trail up in front of me. I smell the pine trees. You become right here, right now. So that could be as simple as that. You don't have to go into this meditation practice or anything like that. It's kind of nice, but you start developing this awareness of what is going on, what my mind is telling me. And then you start having this choice. Wait a second. When I became really mindful and aware of what my mind was telling me at the race, as I made this choice, it's like, I can move forward. All I need to do is take a gel and drink water. Just keep
Right.
moving forward. And that's the key, because we don't know when we're not aware of when we're getting hooked onto this stuff and pushed around, and we start getting pushed around by all that other stuff, maybe what people are thinking of me. I've known people to get really pushed around by, oh God, if I fail this race, I am they start saying to themselves, I'm a
Mm.
failure, people look at me as a failure. Well, that's not going to be helpful. And just doing self talk isn't going to help you with that, or imagery is going to
Yeah.
help you with that. It's looking at what that core is doing. That's why I keep going back to mental health. But, periodizing it along the way, you know, going into that, okay, now we've got that choice. I look at that as emotional regulation. So now we're making this choice, is I've got this choice in how to behave. I could regulate this emotion. Now I can start using that other stuff like self-talk and imagery, and focusing on what I need to get done. When you're doing all that, you're building resilience, you're building confidence. These aren't, you're building, people want to talk about mental toughness. You're building that by being able to regulate those emotions and make a choice to move towards your values and taking action, what that specific action is on your values.
In the little research I did around kind of this topic, the thing that maybe I don't know if the most disappointed is the right word, but like if you think about the physical side of training, there are many books with many training plans with like you can have as many variations and combinations of training that you want. But it
Yeah.
feels like everybody recognizes that the mental performance side is important and it is something that we need to do.
Oh
But
yeah.
a lot of people stop like just shy of like I don't know. Like for example, if you just Google 50K training plan, you'll find a bunch. If you just do mental performance training plan, you'll find very little. Let me put
Right.
like, why do you think there's such a gap? Like, why don't people treat it as important as maybe the physical side, or is it more important? Like, I don't
I
know. This
I
is something I can't reconcile.
I think, as soon as you say mental or psychological, there's, I know here in the United States, there's an incredible stigma of
Mm,
this. You say that, probably in a lot of places around the world. Um, I think of Austria, where you're from, is like Sigmund Freud,
yeah.
was from Austria, and, kind of started this psychoanalytic psychotherapy, yeah, over 100 years ago, and that kind of blossomed into a lot of different things along the way. But there's still this huge stigma. Only
Yeah.
people, because people think of it as is something has to be wrong with me to seek help. And whether it be mental performance or mental health. And instead of going, hey, wait a second, in order to perform well, I need to work on my overall fitness. Overall fitness includes mental health,
Mhm.
and you can include performance on that. I like to start there at mental health. It's like, let's open the door. So I think there's the stigma. I think there's a strong stigma with coaches. Like, in talking with some coaches, there's this kind of like, I don't understand what this mental thing is. This, and it's very much so. I think it is becoming because there is such a drive over the last 10 years. I mean, really the last 10 years is that it has exploded. Um, that there's more of this drive to say, hey, this is important. Like, I think the graduation rate in sport, applied sports psychology and mental performance is just exponentially just blowing up, and it's blowing up in ultra running too. I see a lot of ultra runners going, I want to do that, and they start doing, and so now it's like, oh, this field is like getting crowded.
Mm,
but but it's still very stigmatized. I think,
mm,
I have talked to people. I went to, if you're familiar with the Ultra Sign Up,
yeah,
they have this thing called the Dirt Circus, and it's like you go there and you can go on runs, and they have all these vendors there, and it was a free thing for vendors to show up. And so I had my booth, and a couple of people came over to me, and I gave them my card and talked to them a little bit about what I do. And I've had people come up to me and say, runners don't need mental health, which is such, so far from the truth, and it's like you mentioned earlier about, yeah, do ultra runners and ultra endurance athletes, come to this sport, or in this sport maybe have more history of depression or anxiety. And I know that there's been research that suggested that, and so are they doing it to medicate, or are they doing it, or are they getting it because they're yeah, I don't know, but I think being outside is a good medication. Is a
right.
good therapeutic modality. I still think people need to go in and talk to somebody. I kind of digressed from your question, so I apologize.
Yeah, it's fine, it's fine. And like, so we talked kind of a bit about how you'd start. So you'd start with the mental health side, and then kind of go with the whys, and then you layer on to that and the mindfulness. And how do you kind of measure or gauge progress, right? Like already it's difficult on the physical side, right? Like, and we've tried to come up with trim metrics and CTL and all that
Yeah,
stuff to measure. And like, I feel this is also one of the things why there is this lack of, like, because the question was like lack
totally.
of training
Yeah,
plans,
yeah,
but like we can't
yeah.
even measure physical. At least we have pace, but with mental, we're like, at
Totally
least for
agree
me,
with you. I think, it really goes down to how are you feeling?
right?
Which, oh God, that's a rough question. You're like, how are you feeling in the race? Is this different from, are you feeling like, oh wow, this, that comparison doesn't matter to me. Like, I'm just going to go and enjoy myself and push myself as hard as I can. Your performance may increase with it. The research that I've seen, it's like, okay, for example, there was a research study, and I can't remember the author, but they did a study on self-talk training. So they did this, 6 weeks of self-talk, which is not enough. And then they did the race. And while they didn't see necessarily improvement, which I think it's kind of hard to judge that because there's so many variables in an ultra race, what they saw is 6 weeks later, people were still practicing those skills. And so there was still this, hey, something worked here. I don't know what it was, but something felt good. So how do I gauge it is, where is your mind right now on that importance of, comparison to somebody else or how you're feeling? You're not, I can't guarantee you're going to win a race.
Yeah,
but there's no guarantees. But how your performance did in the race. Did you drop out and you didn't have to? Did you keep pushing and just go, yeah, I'm just feeling a little anxious right now. I'm going to keep going. It doesn't matter. I'm going to refocus on the things that I can control. Um, is your overall health improving because you're addressing that mental health stuff in the background? You're dealing with the stressors, your work stressors. You're not, you're saying no to things when, instead of saying, and getting your schedule fully loaded and you're working till 10 o'clock at night. Are you able to, it's like, okay, now I could say no to things. I could back off and go do this. Are you able to selectively pick out those races instead of I'm going to go do all this and burn yourself out? Are you dealing with all that stuff? Um, so it is certainly subjective, And I know there are people have measures out there. Are they more mindful? You could look at mindfulness, okay, great, you're more
Yeah.
mindful, but is it working?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and that's going to be subjective. Um, and so some people might come to me, well, this isn't working, and they've only worked with me for a week. There's other things we need to dig into.
Right, right. So at the moment, you still think kind of the post-activity comments and the smiley faces that your watch shows you, like of like how are you feeling, how was it, and I don't know if you work with also like ratings of less how you felt in the workout, but also in your day, like maybe on the mental health side. Is that
Yeah.
like still the best metrics we have to measure
Yeah.
these
So
things?
one of the best things to do, um, so so I have this therapy hat, I have this mental performance hat, and then I also have this coaching hat, and so I'm looking at training peaks. Some people look at final surge, and I'll look at comments, but I'm also asking people, so what's your fatigue like? What is your mood like? Fatigue and mood are so telling of whether or not someone could really absorb a workout. Now, I don't feel that fatigue. I was able to go up the stairs fine, but what's my mood like? What are my emotions? You know,
Right.
can we, t- you know, can we start to identify what those emotions are right now? I feel sad. I feel angry. I feel frustrated. I feel scattered. And being open to those emotions, because when we start pushing away emotions, that's when they just tend to percolate back up. you know and
Yeah.
so if we're open to them and just notice them, instead of avoiding stuff, avoiding those emotions, avoiding the feelings of discomfort, we're going to be able to perform a lot better. And so, yeah, what's your mood like? What are your emotions like? Can
Yeah.
identify what's going on right here, right now. Um, More so, in my therapy practice and mental performance practice, but definitely even at athletes I coach, I think as coaches, you could ask those things. You don't have to have them write them down. You got, check in on them. How you doing at home? you know, you're going through a divorce. You just had 6 babies. It's like you got a lot on your hands. I mean, I talk to people all the time, and it's being patient and understanding what their lives are like outside of sport. Um, that's who they are. You're not just, you're the runner. If you're coming to me and looking for just coaching, I'm looking at, I want to work with you who you are, not the runner, just the runner, because I'm not going to be able to help you if we're trying to layer on all this training and you've got all these other stressors in your life.
The first time I reached out to you, I asked you kind of what is the cost of mental performance training, kind of.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Because, of course, like when we talk on the physical side, it's like, okay, you can either do 1 or 2 hours of additional running, or you can do 1 or 2 hours of, for example, sleep or, some other intervention which might actually benefit you more,
Right.
than not running, or
Right.
rather, sorry, than running. Um, so, like, what is the kind of cost of these things? Like, should everybody be doing them? Should a certain part of people be doing them? Like,
And here's that famous answer you'll get from every coach, every therapist, is it depends. I do think, if you are you're leading up to a race. Let's start back from the race itself. You want to unload a lot. You don't want to be training really hard in the week before the race, right? And in the same way is you want to make sure you have dealt with all that heavy stress long beforehand, and you're coming into this without that mental fatigue. So, doing a lot of work with a therapist, or a mental performance coach, like, right, I got to dig into it. There's a lot of energy. Even our discussion is a lot of energy. And if you're doing that right before a race, that takes away from that energy. So, we want to reduce that mental fatigue. So, if we can, here's that periodization idea, is like you kind of do kind of the hard stuff first, really identify those things. Why am I doing this? Learning how to address emotional regulation as it comes up in some of those training sessions, but then starting to back off a little bit. It's like you have your plan. You go into a taper, you should have everything you need, right? And
Yeah.
it's, and that's, and I kind of, we kind of joke around, I like this phrase of learning to land the plane. You're landing the plane right now. You've got all the skills right now. We're going to just land the plane. And so, what is the cost? I do think there is a lot when you're working in depth with somebody as we get started. This is why it's like, okay, let's do this 6 months down the road, beforehand instead of the start. Is that there's a lot of energy, and mental energy and psychological energy. Um, and some things, sometimes the discussion becomes really hard. And I don't want to be doing that right before the race.
Right.
I don't
Right.
want, and so this is where it's like, yeah, it depends. But we want to land the plane. We want to reduce our mental fatigue in the weeks prior to our race. We want to have all those skills prepared and ready to go. So we've practiced during those really hard sessions. Like I'm going to go, if I'm doing, a big race, UTMB, I want to be practicing with those mental skills while I'm training, while I'm going up those steep hills, or I'm, climbing up a pass at Leadville or something like that. I want to be practicing way beforehand. That way it's easier, you know, when I get to the race.
So you would definitely suggest that athletes do potentially some work at home, but also some work on the run, or is it predominantly work on the
Always.
run?
Yeah, in the environment that you're going to be training
Okay.
in. Uh, so yeah, I mean, if I was able to lead a group, I haven't done this yet, but lead a trail run. So okay, let's talk about just being present right now. And you and I are just running up this hill, and I said, okay, I want you to just kind of notice, what do you see? What do you hear? What was your mind telling you beforehand? What is your mind telling you right now as I'm talking to you? And I might practice in session, but I want all my athletes, everyone that I work with, practice in the real world. This isn't just you and I talking about it. I may be working with a rock climber and say, okay, this is our goal here. I want you to try A, B, and C at your next climb tomorrow. you know,
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
and if you're not doing that, that's not going to help you. And this is where you start to integrate it into your life. Even if this was somebody who's not even coming to me for mental performance, I still want them to work on these skills in their life when they're talking to their significant other, when they're talking to their children. How are you doing regulating your emotions right here, right now? Not just talking to me, but let's get out there and practice this stuff, and do it daily and consistently. That's when you're going to get the most out of it.
You talked about a lot about this, like almost closeness between you and the athlete you're working with.
Yeah.
Do you feel that it's more effective if done in person, equally effective if done in person versus online? Like,
So when you mean so in person, like if I had somebody right here in my office, yeah, I think, that's ideal. A lot of times the people I work with are online, it's a
right,
video chat like this. And I think that is equally can be equally as
okay,
helpful because there is also an issue of accessibility. So we think about, it's like, hey, I've got this busy life. Leaving my house, driving 20 or 30 minutes or an hour in some cases to go see a therapist or mental performance consultant, that's not necessarily helpful. So I think the accessibility, if we can make this, going back to that idea of breaking the stigma, if we can make it more accessible, and this is where cost also becomes an issue for people, and I get it. Um, and I do work with people who, who definitely want, if they're really motivated and want to work on that, if you're, we could work on that. Um, so really going to this, um, yeah, being in person or online, I think that's helpful. If it was in the environment on the trail, man, that'd be really key. If I could do more of that, that's ideal.
and do you find like when you accrue races, or if you, I believe you had the opportunity to maybe see some of the athletes you work with
Oh yeah.
on the trail, like during races, like do you find that in that stressful environment or high anxiety environment that they do manage to effectively use the strategies that you practice essentially?
I think so. I think so. I've had comments of people going, "Yeah, I started becoming just like more present. And when I was becoming more present, I was able to focus on that thing that I needed to do, taking that action. Maybe that action also is just moving faster.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, wait a second. I've got more in me. I could do this, you know. And so, I've seen it in real time. And I've also had reports, people going, yeah, Neil, that was really helpful. Um, again, the key, that I share with everybody is practicing. Practice, 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 practice. You have to be consistent and you can't just like, I'm just going to think about this at home. I have to ground myself on the trail, when things are getting really, really, really hard. Have a good training. That's great. Get out in those really challenging days. It's raining, it's snowing out here right now. There's snow on the ground. It's like, yeah, go for a good trail run out there. It's, 20 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's, get out there in that environment. And so, yes, I've seen that. I've seen it happen. And, I've also experienced it myself where it's like, oh, that daylight, the light bulb goes on and it's like, okay, now you start making that connection. Once you start doing it once or twice, that connection, okay, we're starting to change neural pathways and our brain is going, yeah, I could start to do this more.
Do you also see, because you were mentioning, for example, going out on a run and when it's cold, and maybe now in the winter time, it's not only just cold, but also dark. And
Yeah.
um, do you think the mental interventions are or need to be intentional, or is this, or are there some of these like maybe less intentional, like going out for a run when it's snowy and dark and cold is like, of course we say it builds mental toughness, but it's kind of like an indirect effect, or like, am I seeing
Yes.
this wrong? Like,
Yeah. Well, I think you need to be intent. You can do it organically, like you described. I'm just going to go for a run and not think about it and just go out and do it. And this is where I think um, some of your best athletes, in the world sometimes do it just really organically.
mm,
Like sometimes they have gone and, done the mental performance and they're not necessarily, the interaction I have with athletes is confidential. And so and they sometimes will keep, they'll themselves not talk about it. And some do talk about it a lot. So they may have had training, they may have not. But my assessment, my guess is some of that present moment focus is very organic, in that they have challenged themselves, intentionally throughout their life. And so, well, I'm going to go push through that, I'm going to do this. And it just really becomes organic. I think for a lot of people being very intentional, okay, today I'm going to really focus on just really trying to be present. And I'm going to use this cue to remind me to be present. Maybe I'm going to write it down in my water bottle. Um, Maybe I'm going to just set an alarm on my watch to go off every half hour, every 10 minutes, and just remind myself, okay, right here, right now, look around you, or focusing on that mantra, or, okay, let's dig a little deeper right now. Let's push ourselves a little harder right now, or whatever that is, whatever that cue is. But being intentional about it, I think could be really helpful. So if I'm working with an athlete, let's intentionally work on mental skills on this next run. Let's intentionally work on self talk on this run. Let's intentionally work on mindfulness on this next run. And then go out and do other things or, organically, and just kind of, let the environment dictate what your mind does and what you learn from that.
I want to maybe spend a few minutes talking about maybe the nerd in me, let's put it that way, wants to talk a bit about the scientific side of this thing. Like I mentioned it a bit
Yeah.
earlier, that I'm a bit maybe disappointed with some of the lack of research, and
Right.
like I think honestly, hearing you speak, I think I like my opinion is like a wrong opinion, in that I don't know, I expected at some point, like, we have studies which are like, what is the best interval length? 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes,
Right.
6 minutes. Like
Right.
it's very structured, you know.
Right.
And on the mental side, you have like, you do it and you don't do it, makes you 1% better, or like the athletes who did it tend to perform 1% better than, like, it's very generic, right? Like, but from what I'm understanding, maybe I'm just like understanding it wrong. Maybe it's just a case of like, if you feel better, if you are able to, like, I put it maybe under the like perceived exertion bucket, like in
Right,
on the physical training side, we
right,
say like, how do you feel?
right,
And if you apply that model to the mind, if you have a healthy mind, then you
right,
will just perform better. And
right.
is that why the studies can't maybe capture this?
I
Or
I think the studies are some of the studies that are out there are capturing some of it. So, for example, self-talk studies that have looked at athletes. Usually, it's on a bike trainer. It's not usually
yep.
an ultra runner. I think that's the easiest thing is they keep the trainer right there, and they can actually assess it right there. So they'll do these self-talk studies where they might have people, okay, you're gonna have this kind of, yeah, I don't know, blanket idea, thought, it's like doesn't matter. It's very generic. And then you're going to have this motivational self-talk and you're going to have this instructional self-talk. And they look at that and they look at the power they can increase on the bike. And then they put them in a heated room, so a sauna, and have them do the same thing. And they saw that they had less perceived exertion at a higher power. So it's like, yeah, this was easier because as I'm using that self-talk,
Okay.
and I've experimented with that as I'm riding on my trainer. It's like, okay, I'm going to use this, and da, da, da. Oh, my power was a little higher here. Whoa, that's so they can see that. So if you're looking at studies like that, that's cool. They know that imagery works. They're looking at those individual studies. Um, there was a really interesting one by a neuroscientist that looked at actually, I think 75 ultra runners, and this is very recent. I think it came out in October. Um, that I was looking at ultra runners, and I got to dive into this a little bit more, but it was looking at like the brain waves and looking at how after races people have less attention or the ability to focus and less ability to emotionally regulate. And so that what they're identifying is like, yeah, cognitive load, that load on your mind during the race plays into this. And so how do we unload that and how do we deal with that so we could focus better during the race? It was kind of an interesting study, and I got to dive into it a little bit more because there was a lot more to it, and it was very, very analytical. But so people are digging into this stuff. But I think when you start comparing things, like if I'm going to compare self-talk to imagery, which is better, you're not going to find a
Yeah.
difference. You're going to find that they both work. Where you will find some individual differences is kind of looking at the different modalities of therapy and mental performance, like cognitive behavioral therapy versus acceptance commitment therapy versus dialectic behavior therapy. And you see kind of these little differences and who these might work a little differently for, but you also see that there's only a certain percentage that okay, the works up to here, but really where it's really coming from is that interaction and that connection with that therapist and that relationship that they have and the rapport they have with that therapist. And that could be this is the same thing with the mental performance coach too. So there's this relationship part, which is I think still being studied is like, why is that so important? And, what is that connection about that helps facilitate? And this is where good coaching could also help is what a part about that relation can help facilitate that performance. When I kind of just stand back and I'd love to research this on ultra runners. I really wish I had the time and, like I wish I go back and get a doctorate on this and just do this. But, um, look at ultra runners and look at what their team is doing. How are they connected with their coach, their dietitian, their mental performance coach, their family? What's that relationship like? Is it kind of this synergistic effect where they're just like, yeah, I feel energized by being around these people and I just rock it through these races. I know I have seen that with individuals that have these teams that are there that are really connected to them, they really exceed really well. They really do well. And it may be not even the physiological interventions, but that team approach, that connection that they've had there. So I've kind of dumped a lot of stuff at you there, but yeah, but I agree. The research, and this is one thing that has frustrated with the mental performance and even psychology is that there has been this dearth of research, or sometimes it's just like individual case studies,
Mm,
anecdotal. And I saw one study on mental toughness, and it was this. I don't even know how this got published, but it was this guy who was just his own theory on mental toughness, and he was analyzing. He was doing is looking at his own journals, and it's like you can't study yourself. I mean that's a little biased there. You need to apply this to a lot of people, and so there's that element of the difficulty with doing this research is again there's the stigma, again there's this okay you're in a research setting, so you got males between the ages of 18 and 21 that are being studied, and so there's no carryover to everybody else, and so you really have to have these really probably a lot more years in this, and the funding to look at all this stuff. I'd love to see UTMB dive into this. I'd love to see Western states dive into it more and looking at it, and allowing researchers out there and people willing to be part of these studies. But I think they have to be long-term studies where they start 6 months in advance.
right.
Where it's like, what are you doing right now? What are you doing mentally to prepare for this race? Because I think once you start looking at, okay, we're going to go and here is your training. You have these 2, 3 athletes and the training is almost the same physically. Now layer on that mental skills training. Okay, now you have the blind, the subjects that are blind. They don't, they're over here. What's the differences? What does it look like at the end of those results? If we could do that, that'd be really cool. I've wanted to do that for years.
Yeah, another question that I was gonna ask is, what would, like, if you had unlimited time, budget, and resources, what study would you do? But I think these
Oh,
perfectly
I,
answered that already.
Oh, that is it right there. I'd
Yeah,
want to, and there's certain measures you could do beforehand, on mindfulness, on psychological flexibility, on, there's measures of confidence, mental toughness that you could use. And you really have to kind of go at that, and the challenge here is, okay, you've got 9 months. We know with training, there can be a lot of attrition, in training. So there's attrition there. You have to have a lot of subjects and you have to have a lot of people willing to, okay, spend their time doing this. But yeah, I think that would be really cool. Have them do the same kind of training, get to the race, and, what's the difference? They have to do it with the same coach because there's going to be
yep,
individual variations with a coach. It's just it's interesting. Or you have to have the measures for that. I'm not that adept at the statistics, but
right.
I know there's ways to kind of block that out and measure that stuff. So I'd be really psyched if someone out there wants to join me on that and bring me along.
I had this question, which is quite speculative. So, like, if you need time to think about it and not answer, like, it's fine. We can just cut it out. So, I have kind of a history of doing backyard ultras, and like the
Yeah,
whole concept of it, even as someone who did it, like, really fascinates me, because
yeah,
it's like, as I was saying also before we started the recording, it's like like a lot of people get into trail running for the environment aspect of it, and the you climb a mountain, you have a great view, maybe it's a sunrise, but when you do a backyard ultra, or also I was seeing like a race like the Tunnel 200, where they like there are these events which like take away almost all the fun of these, the maybe little fun that you would have in these like really long and hard events, right? Because it's the
yeah,
same loop, and the top runners go for like almost 5 days now. Like,
yeah.
do you have any maybe analysis or maybe commentary of like what makes the runners who go further, what allows them to go further? Like, is there, what part of that do you think is physical, what part of that is mental? Like,
I think it's definitely a combination of both. It is durability, physical durability. Because there is going to be a breakdown in muscles, right? We know that. And so, what was their training? What was that training like? So you have that physical durability, but then I think you also have that. Yeah, and can I say, is it 80/20 or whatever? I can't put a number on it, but I do think that physical durability is going to be a big part of it.
Yeah.
Um, because people get injured, because there's, for me, doing that race at Javelina, these 5 loops. So I had this calf tightness that just happened. That was an issue of durability. Um, but that triggered that mental piece. And so if you are working on that mental piece and that ability to just focus and just, okay, not just focus on my values and purpose, but what your action is. What do you need to be doing right now? And that, for a lot of that's moving forward,
Yeah.
moving forward.
Yeah.
If you can still move forward and take your gels every half hour, or you're drinking your water bottle and taping your feet and taking care of all that stuff, that that this is the way, okay, I have to stay warm because it's raining now, or I have to cool off. I get my water on me and my ice on me. That's your job. That is the action you can, if you could focus on the action, you know, and keep doing that, that's where you're going to have that success. Where people lose, when they get bored, they get distracted, they get hooked on that, I think, my body can't handle this anymore, instead of, well, let's see, just being curious, tapping into that curiosity is like, well, let's see. Let's see what happens here. you know yeah, I didn't know for sure I could make it around this last 20-mile loop, but I was pretty certain that I could hike 20 miles in 9 hours.
Yeah.
So, and it was like, yeah, I could move, and, as long as I didn't sit down, I was fine, and, and stayed cool, and that's all I thought about. And going back to that really basic stuff. That's the cool stuff about ultra running that I think is really cool, is how do we get, if we could take those experiences and bring that into our lives, what can I do that today, that is meaningful and is purposeful action, instead of, I can't do this. I'm no good at this. What can I do right now? So
Yeah.
I hope that made sense.
Yeah, no, no. I mean, the like I've listened also to Laz, the like originator or the creator kind of the backyard ultra, and he
Yeah.
always talks about that in the backyard. It's always it's a moment of weakness. It's that moment of weakness,
Yes.
and
Yes.
like
Yes.
in a race, as you said, like I know I had 9 miles to hike, 9 hours to hike 20 miles. With the backyard, like you don't necessarily have that luxury. Like if you fail one bell, like if you have a minute 30 seconds of weakness and you're like, I need a longer
Yeah,
break,
you
I'm
don't
not
have
gonna,
time. You
you're
you don't have
out.
time.
So
So it is a moment of weakness, but what I'll say is, I don't wanna use it as weakness, but it's a moment
mm,
of where you are hooked on something
yeah.
that, that is it's pushing you around. And this is where I kinda, I digress from a lot of people who go, "We're doing mental strength training." Let's call it what it is. It's not mental strength training, it's not mental toughness training. It's performance. We're learning,
Right.
it's performance, sometimes it's psychotherapy. It's learning how to move, and take action on our values and our goals, and creating purposeful action and moving in that direction. And learning how to recognize when we are hooked on that moment, right? At that moment of, if you want to call it weakness, just a moment, that moment, that hooked on that thought, that's pushing you around. It's like, or that feeling, that sensation that's pushing you around. Let's notice when we're getting hooked on that. Hey, I got to move over here. I got to keep moving. You know,
Yeah.
yeah, those moments are key, and that's why the faster you do it, the better. And
Right.
that's where the practice comes in.
Okay, so we're running a bit long on time, and I want to be definitely
No problem.
respectful of your time. So let's start winding down here. So we're talking about these like moments of weakness, or not those moments, those moments.
Moments.
And of course, the people who are hopefully listening to this and maybe got to this point are like thinking, okay, how can I start on the moments? Like maybe you have your resources, your stop stack might be a good start. So um anything that you want to point people towards your stuff, or like your content or other people's
You know,
content?
you could look at my content on my Substack. There's a lot of, a lot of other folks that are in the ultra running space. I know Addie Bracy has written a book on mental skills for ultra marathons. That's a good place. One of the places that not necessarily a place, but really a spot inside is to start with is just looking at what your purpose is, for these races. Why are you running? Why did you get into this to begin with? What are your values? Is it curiosity? Is it adventure? Is it challenge? Is it fitness? Really looking into that, narrowing it down to, hey, this is why I do this race. It's because I want to be curious here. I want to explore. Or I really want to get good at this skill. Maybe it's even getting good at the skill of staying present, and that's why you're running. you know, but really looking at your values. You can do the Chat GPT and come up with a list of values, and it'll throw out 30 values for you. Who are you? Get to know yourself and why you're doing this. You know, yeah, find that out first. So yeah, I mean, looking at my stuff, yeah, I think Addie Bracy's got, she's got a book. I don't know if she's got like a Substack or anything. Matt Fitzgerald, I think you've connected with Matt
Yep.
Fitzgerald. He's got a lot of, he's a great writer, and he's got a lot of stuff out there he dives into. Um, you know, you could start there. Look up, in the United States, you could go to the Association for Applied Sports Psychology and look up for certified mental performance consultants. You could find someone who's local to you in your state. If you're in a remote area, you could always find somebody that, you don't have to be licensed to be a, certified mental performance consultant. So you could work in different states. Um, so, but there's other sports psychology throughout throughout the world. So look it up in the country that you're in and find out, because I know there's different laws, and connect with somebody to find out who's local to you, who's talking about this. Listen to these podcasts. The Coopcast has a lot. He's brought on a lot of experts. Justin Ross. A couple others. He talks to people about that, and kind of starting there. Looking at those. Um, there is a podcast. I'm just looking really quickly at my books. Brad Stolberg and Steve Magnus
Nice.
have a lot of books out on the subject and have a podcast. That's a really good one to look at too. I think they're really doing a great job of just spreading the word. And I've seen this transition with Steve Magnus over the last 15 years of where he was just studying, talking about physiology and coaching. And then he has evolved and like really talking about mindset and seeing the importance of that. Um, so just throwing that out there.
I think we're mostly out of time, so I would just leave last words to you. Where can people find
Yeah.
you? Where can people contact you? Anything you want to leave the audience with?
So yeah, you could find me on Instagram. I'll just give you my yeah.
Yeah.
At therapist.cmpc.neal Neal. You can find me there. You could find me at my website. You can just go to nealpalles.com, nealpalles.com, and that takes you to my business website. So,
Right. Yeah, we'll make
uh,
sure to have all the social links in the
oh, awesome.
description and stuff like that. So,
Awesome.
um,
Yeah, and, reach out if you're thinking of races. You're here in the United States, you're here in Colorado especially, and you're looking at races later in the year, next year, reach out to me. We can work together. I'll have a mental skills for ultra running group start in early February, and that'll run for 6 weeks, and you could be around the entire world enjoying this.
right.
I do record it and send it back out to people, but I like people being involved, like I said, face to face, and not just reading a book, because I want to have that interaction and dialogue, which I think is extremely valuable.
Right. Okay. I
Cool.
want to thank you for the time you
You're
spent
welcome.
to speak to me. Like, as always, I feel like I leave these conversations with more questions than I entered. So we could spend another few hours, but this was great. I learned a lot and you
Sure.
left me with more questions. So
Good.
that's
Reach
good.
out to me again. I'm here. Okay.
Perfect. All right. Thank you.
Awesome.
Have a good
You're
day.
welcome.